I'll never forget that day. It was one of those mornings where the weight of everything just felt a little heavier. I'd been working tirelessly for years, trying to prove myself, working my way up in the legal field. My heart raced as I stepped into the courthouse. I had prepared for this case for months, and I knew how important it was. But as I walked into the courtroom, I felt a sense of dread. The room was cold, the walls seemed to echo with tension, and all eyes were on me. I could hear the whispers behind me, some skeptical, others curious. I was one of the youngest lawyers to take on such a high-profile case. I could feel their judgment, and I could see the looks. Then, I noticed him. The cop, Officer Walker. He was sitting on the witness stand, his posture stiff, his uniform pressed to perfection. He had this cocky, almost arrogant attitude about him, as if he already knew how everything was going to go. He wasn't even looking at me when I made eye contact, and it made me feel small, like I wasn't even worthy of his attention. I tried to push the nerves away. This wasn't my first trial, but there was something about the way Officer Walker carried himself that got under my skin. Maybe it was the way he smirked at me when I stood up to introduce myself. Maybe it was how he looked me up and down, sizing me up in a way that made me feel like I didn't belong in the same room. The trial began, and I could tell from the start he didn't take me seriously. He answered my questions with a tone of mockery, almost as if he found my presence amusing. It was as if he believed the only reason I was there was because I didn't know what I was doing. I fought to hold my ground, but his words, his tone, they were a constant reminder that I had to work twice as hard just to be seen as equal. I couldn't let him see me falter. I couldn't let anyone see how much it hurt. The days dragged on, and every moment felt like an uphill battle. I couldn't escape Officer Walker's mocking attitude. It was almost as if he was trying to break me, to make me question if I really belonged in this field. But I wasn't going to let him win. Then it happened. It was late in the trial, and we were nearing the closing arguments. I had gathered all my evidence, cross-examined witnesses, and put together everything that could possibly prove my case. But as I stood up to make my final argument, I saw something that made my heart stop. Officer Walker was laughing. Not just a chuckle, but a full-on laugh. It was directed at me. He was making fun of how nervous I looked, how unsure I seemed in his eyes. I took a deep breath. I couldn't let him get to me. I had worked too hard. I wouldn't let this man, who had no respect for me, take away everything I had fought for. I looked directly at him, my voice calm but firm. "You think it's funny?" I asked, keeping my eyes locked on his. "You think that I'm just some kid who doesn't know how to fight for what's right? Well, I'm here to show you I can." There was a pause. The room grew quiet. I could feel the weight of every eye on me. I wasn't going to back down. Months passed after the trial. It felt like I had barely gotten the chance to breathe before the phone call came. "Ms. Matthews?" The voice on the other end of the line said. "This is Officer Walker. I need your help with something." I was stunned. This couldn't be real. I thought about hanging up. After everything that happened in the courtroom, after the way he treated me, there was no way I'd work with him. But something told me to hear him out. He went on to explain how he had gotten into some trouble with a case that he had mishandled, and now he was looking for a lawyer, someone who could represent him when everything was falling apart. He seemed desperate, almost like the confidence he had back then had completely vanished. "I know I was hard on you in court," he said, "but I was wrong. I should have respected you more. You were the best lawyer I've ever seen in action." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. This wasn't the cocky cop I'd faced in court. He sounded defeated, vulnerable. It felt almost surreal. I wanted to refuse, to remind him of all the hurt he had caused me, but I couldn't. There was something about his voice, something raw that made me pause. "Okay," I said, "I'll help you." I didn't know why I agreed, but something told me this was a chance to prove something, maybe even to myself. The day we met in person again was nothing like I imagined. When I had agreed to help him, I hadn't expected the meeting to feel so surreal. Officer Walker, the man I had once stood opposite in that courtroom, the man who had mocked me, who had looked at me as if I was nothing more than an annoyance, was now sitting across from me. But he was no longer that confident, unshakable figure. He looked completely different. His shoulders were slumped as though the weight of the world was bearing down on him, and his once sharp, piercing eyes were now dull with exhaustion. His uniform, so perfectly pressed during the trial, was now a little wrinkled, like he hadn't bothered to care about the details anymore. There was a heaviness about him, a tiredness that went beyond just the case we were facing. The arrogance that had once radiated off of him had vanished entirely. Instead, there was a man who was beaten down, humbled by his own actions, and, in a way, defeated. It felt strange seeing him like this. It almost didn't feel real. This was the same man who had laughed at me, who had made me feel small and insignificant in front of a room full of people. Now he was sitting before me, not as the person who had once dismissed me, but as someone who was desperately reaching out for help. The world he had once seemed to control now seemed to be slipping through his fingers. "I know I don't deserve your help," he said quietly, his voice almost cracking. He didn't meet my eyes. Instead, he looked down at his feet, shifting uncomfortably in his seat. "But I'm asking for it anyway. I don't know who else to turn to." I sat there, my heart conflicted, emotions swirling in a way I couldn't untangle. On one hand, there was a part of me that still felt the sting of the way he had treated me in court. The humiliation, the condescension. It hadn't disappeared just because he was sitting there, broken. But then, in that same breath, I saw the vulnerability in his eyes. I saw the man beneath the uniform. A man who was just as human as anyone else. Someone who had made a mistake, a big mistake, and was now paying the price for it. He was trying, I could see that. He was asking for help in a way I never thought he would. The anger I had held onto for so long was fading, but it wasn't easy to let go of it. The hurt didn't just disappear because he was now looking at me with a different kind of sincerity. Forgiveness wasn't something that came quickly. I had every right to walk away, to leave him to deal with the consequences of his own actions. But somehow, deep down, I knew that wasn't the right thing to do. "You don't have to explain," I said quietly, my voice softer than I intended. I didn't want to hear the excuses anymore. I didn't need to know why he had acted the way he did. He had already explained enough in court with his actions. What mattered now was what he was going to do about it. "I'll help you," I continued, my words steady despite the whirlwind inside of me, "but only if you take this seriously. This isn't a game. You've made your choices, and now you have to face them. This isn't just about fixing your reputation or getting back to your career. This is about accountability. This is about understanding that your actions have consequences, on other people and on yourself." His eyes, which had been averted for most of the conversation, finally met mine. There was something raw in his gaze, something that made me pause. He wasn't just asking for help to get out of a jam. He was asking for a chance to rebuild, to become someone he could be proud of again. The room was heavy with silence as he nodded, regret and determination on his face. "I will. I'll do whatever it takes," he promised, his voice sincere. It was strange being on the other side. A part of me wanted to walk away, to remind him of how he had humiliated me. I could have left him to face his mess, but something more important kept me there. Helping him wasn't about revenge. It was about showing him what it meant to take responsibility and grow as a person. It wasn't about winning or proving I was right. It was about doing what was right. I wasn't doing this for him alone. I was doing it for me too. I had to remind myself that people can change, that forgiveness is possible. As I helped him, my anger faded, replaced by peace. It wasn't just about winning. It was about teaching us both what it means to be human. Making mistakes, learning from them, and standing tall after you fall. Though it wasn't easy, I knew this was where I was meant to be. The role reversal taught me that sometimes the hardest thing is helping the person who hurt you most. But in doing so, I realized that doing the right thing isn't always about victory. Sometimes it's about growth. And that's something I'll carry with me forever. The case didn't go as smoothly as either of us had hoped. It was one setback after another, and as the days passed, it became more apparent that Officer Walker wasn't exactly going to get the clean slate we had both hoped for. The media attention was relentless, the public opinion was unforgiving, and the courtroom battles were far from easy. It wasn't like the triumphant victories I had imagined when I first agreed to help him. There were moments when I felt completely drained, questioning whether I had made the right decision to get involved. The pressure weighed on me. The man who had once mocked me in court, the one who had treated me like an amateur, was now the one sitting across from me, asking for help. And I could see how much he had changed, how deeply he regretted his past actions. It was hard to ignore the small, quiet apologies in his eyes when he spoke, but that didn't erase the scars left from everything that had happened before. The way he belittled me, the way he dismissed me in front of everyone, it didn't just vanish because he now needed me. But I couldn't hold on to anger anymore. I saw a man, broken by his own mistakes, asking for a second chance. And deep down I knew I couldn't just leave him to fend for himself. It wasn't about winning for me, it wasn't about proving a point. It was about giving him a chance to do better, to show that even the most arrogant people can learn from their mistakes, if they're willing to face them. The road was long. I had to put in so much work just to get his reputation back to a place where he could even think about continuing his career. I saw the emotional toll it was taking on him. Gone was the cocky officer I had met in court, replaced by a man who was struggling with his past. Every time we met, he looked a little more exhausted, a little more beaten down. But I pushed forward despite the exhaustion that threatened to overtake me as well. I knew that if I gave up now, it wouldn't just be him who failed. It would be both of us. The trial ended with a quiet conclusion. It wasn't the glorious victory I had imagined when I first stepped into that courtroom as a young, eager attorney. No one was applauding, no one was celebrating, there was no hero's welcome, no public recognition. It was just the quiet hum of a job done, a case closed. But in that silence, I felt a strange sense of satisfaction. A quiet pride in knowing I had stuck with it. I had done the right thing, even when it was hard. Even when the person I was helping didn't deserve my help. As we walked out of the courthouse together, I could tell it wasn't over for him. The weight of everything that had happened still hung heavy on his shoulders. But there was a softness to him now, a humility. He wasn't the same man who had mocked me in court. I saw it in the way he carried himself, in the way he spoke, in the way his eyes met mine with a depth of gratitude I never expected to see from him. "I never thought I'd say this, but thank you," he said, his voice quiet, almost hesitant. "You were the only one who gave me a chance. You're a great lawyer. I didn't know how to say it before. But now, I do." I stood there, just looking at him for a moment. His words hit me in a way I didn't expect. I had spent so long trying to prove myself, trying to show people I belonged, that I hadn't expected this kind of recognition to come from the one person who had once dismissed me. I wasn't sure how to respond. Part of me wanted to brush it off, to say something dismissive like I had before. But another part of me, the part that had grown through this experience, knew I couldn't do that. I smiled, though it was bittersweet. I felt a lump rise in my throat, but I held it together. "I'm just doing my job," I replied, my voice steady despite the emotions swirling inside me. "It's not about being great, it's about doing what's right." But in that moment, as I stood there, looking at this man who had once mocked me, I realized that I had done something more than just my job. I had helped him find redemption, not just professionally, but personally. I had shown him that he wasn't beyond help, that he wasn't defined by his past mistakes. I had helped him understand that it was okay to be vulnerable, to ask for forgiveness, and that no matter how much he had hurt me or anyone else, it was never too late to change. That moment stuck with me long after we parted ways. I knew the journey wasn't over for either of us. The scars of the past would always remain, but there was healing in the work we had done together. In a strange way, he had taught me just as much as I had taught him. It wasn't just about being strong. Sometimes the real strength lies in forgiveness. And sometimes, the hardest people to forgive are the ones who hurt you the most. But that doesn't mean you can't show them kindness, even when they least expect it. That doesn't mean you can't be the person who gives them the chance to change. Because in the end, that's what matters most. Not being right, not getting revenge, but offering the possibility of a better tomorrow.